And if you want a reminder of just how much every single vote can matter, just take a look at British Columbia. Polls in the provincial election there closed last night. There is still no clear winner. Some races so close, just a few dozen votes separating the candidates. And we will have to wait until every vote is counted to find out who will lead the province. Will the NDP form government for the third time in a row? Or will the Conservatives take power for the first time in decades? Susanna De Silva shows us what happens now.
In downtown Vancouver, a whole lot of rain and uncertainty. A day after the provincial election, it's still not clear whether the NDP or the Conservatives won.
It's just typical politics. Every time there's politics involved, you never know what's coming.
I'm not surprised that we're so divided. Households are divided, families are divided, people are really polarized.
As the votes rolled in, it became clear neither party would be able to claim a quick victory. The votes were just too close, and they're still being counted. 47 seats are needed to form a majority government. As it stands, the NDP are leading or elected in 46, the BC Conservatives in 45, and the Green Party in 2.
It's pretty classic that it's going to be the Green Party with 2 seats that's going to have balance of power by essentially being able to get what they want by whatever side is going to give them their concessions, which is obviously going to be the NDP. But if it ends up 46-45, there will be just like the NDP will be a small minority, which they won't necessarily need to have formed government. But they essentially not be able to because of the 2 seats that the Greens have. The Greens could vote with the Conservatives. We're not going to let you form government if the Greens aren't satisfied with what the NDP are going to agree on. And you'll see this throughout their legislative cycle. This could be something that would, in a perfect world, would move the NDP left. But let's not even forget that David Eby's entire rise to the leadership of the BC NDP in 2022 was surrounded by controversy from the very beginning. When Horgan left and resigned, there was a disqualification of the only competitor in the leadership race in 2022. I can't remember her name, the climate activist in the BC leadership race. It was intended to find a successor for John Horgan after his resignation. And it turned into a highly contentious affair with many accusing the NDP of orchestrating basically a calculated move to ensure Eby's victory, essentially like a coup against Angela Aberdabai. She was a surprise entry into the race. It dramatically shifted the dynamics. Her campaign was focusing on climate justice, progressive policies, and it resonated with a wide segment of the population, not just the party base, but even Greens. And within a very short period, her campaign brought in around 13,000 new members, reportedly, which was significantly higher than 4,000 that was attributed to Eby's camp. And it was this influx of support that made her a serious contender, which seemingly alarmed the NDP establishment, who viewed Eby as this long-standing figure within the party as a safer, more predictable choice for leadership in what was becoming an ever more neoliberal party that was completely separate from what the NDP federally, even them with their like very lukewarm milquetoast faux progressive stances. The NDP in BC is like basically the liberals. And that's why they're essentially isn't a liberal party, because they are liberalism as far as like fake progressivism and social progressivism with pro-capitalist, like a pro-capitalist veneer on top of it, is essentially what the BC NDP has been under Horgan and now under Eby. As Aberdowai's momentum grew, there was tons of concerns within the NDP. The party saw her as a potential threat and began scrutinizing her campaign. Elizabeth Cull, the NDP's chief electoral officer, initiated an investigation into the legitimacy of her campaign, particularly regarding how her team was able to recruit so many new members. The investigation eventually claimed that her campaign had violated rules by collaborating too closely with third-party organizations, notably environmental advocacy groups like 350.org, to boost her membership. There was also some membership being pulled from the Greens. These are the accusations that led to her disqualification. Ironically enough, 2 years ago today, on October 20th, 2022, and her disqualification was highly controversial. Critics alleged that the investigation was deliberately crafted to prevent her from appealing the decision, and swiftly moved the party towards giving the reins to Eby, basically by default, because she was disqualified. And tons of people viewed that move as an orchestrated attempt to just clear the path for Eby to essentially have no actual leadership race, just a coronation of somebody. And yeah, otherwise he would not have won, right? And so by disqualifying Appadari, the NDP leadership effectively removed the competition and left Eby as a sole candidate for the position. As a result, he won the leadership by default, right? And was sworn in as the 37th premier in November of 2022. Supporters of Eby and the NDP's establishment have argued that this disqualification was a necessary step to ensure, quote unquote, rule-abiding leadership race. And they contended that Appadari's campaign had overstepped the boundaries which were set by the party, and that then justified her removal. However, many within and outside of the BC NDP saw this as a strategic decision to sideline a more progressive candidate who has policies and a popularity very much threaten the status quo. And this entire ordeal has casted a massive shadow over Eby's premiership from the very onset. And while he quickly took on the role and moved forward within his policy agenda, it's this perception that the leadership rate was manipulated to favor him has lingered, and you can see it. That's the whole point of this rant, is that either because of conservative culture war, or even just like more pro-developer, pro-capitalist, anti-sustainable development, anti-ecological protection, et cetera, has gained traction against what is a status quo, lukewarm, neoliberal party cosplayed as progressive, the no democracy party, the NDP. And yeah, this is it's a controversy that has raised many questions about the eternal democracy of the BC NDP, and highlights very clear tensions between the party, the voters of the party, and the party's establishment and its quote unquote progressive and quote unquote grassroots support base, because none of those things are actually true when you really get down to it. Otherwise, Eby would not be the leader of this party headed into this election.
That could give it the balance of power. There are 11 ridings that are too close for CBC News to project a winner. So far, the riding of Richmond-Steveston has the largest gap between the two top candidates, 435 votes. The riding of Wanda Fuka-Malahat has the smallest gap, with just 23 votes.
There is also another message in this narrowest of margins. That's we got to do better.
The results are a blow to the governing NDP. Leader David Eby acknowledging the party failed to connect with voters frustrated over the cost of living and public safety. And in a statement Sunday, he said his party was committed to working with the legislature you elected to deliver for you.
I'm optimistic that
This also, it ends up serving the NDP, because they can now just point and say, look, if you take a look at the last election, we've had a certain amount of progress. We've had like a stronghold brewing for conservatives, so we can't have such progressive policies. So we have to work with what we have, right? Like, it just sets up what is an already, again, lukewarm, milquetoast, neoliberal, pro-capitalist party to be even more of that as they are forced to work with what they have. The difference, though, and what could change that, is if the Greens are savvy enough to, again, it sounds idealistic, but to push them left by saying, we're going to vote with the cons to keep you from being able to pass the stuff that you want unless you start giving us concessions, right? The problem with that will not, the NDP can do the exact same thing with the Conservatives, right? Which they're going to. That's why he said that, right? That's the double-edged sword of it all.
The final story of this election has not been written yet.
But BC Conservative leader John Rustad is saying not so fast. And even if it is the NDP who forms a minority government, they vow to take them down.
And we're telling all of our candidates, take down their signs, but keep them handy, don't throw them out.
The Green Party could negotiate a deal to support the NDP as it did in 2017, but the parties disagree on issues like the carbon tax and drug policy, leaving the question of how long that deal could last.
Depends what the ransom is from the Greens and if the NDP is willing to pay it.
Some mail-in ballots.
See, it's as simple as that. If the NDP is willing to move left, they would ensure themselves a 48 to 45 seat split. But again, the Greens could play hardball, put them in a position where they can't even form government unless the NDP agrees to what the Greens want to be able to create a coalition. And again, it's not as cut and dry as I've just explained, but that's the nature of politics in Canada right now because of the parliamentary system.
Still need to be counted, and there will be at least 2 official recounts because the vote difference is less than 100 votes. All of that counting will happen this weekend.
And Susie, as you mentioned, this isn't the first time the BC has had results this close. What are some of the scenarios that can play out here?
Yeah, that's right. Back in 2017, the then BC Liberals won a very slim minority government, and then leader Christy Clark could not maintain the confidence of the legislature. That's when the NDP took over with the support of the Green Party. That is a scenario that could happen again. If the Conservatives were to win the most seats but fail to win a majority, the NDP would still get the first chance to govern, but of course would need the support of the Greens.
See, what she just said, that is a possibility. I don't think that's going to happen. It's going to be the NDP that probably ends up with the most seats. But don't forget, that exact scenario could play out with the federal Liberals, NDP, and Greens if the Conservatives win a small minority, right?
Susanna De Silva in Vancouver.